All right, today we are diving deep into Donald Trump's tariff wars. But here's the thing, this isn't just one story. It's really two completely different playbooks. You've got the strategy from his first term, and then you have the proposed tariff blitz for a potential second. So let's get right into it.
So I want you to think back to Trump's first term and all that talk about trade negotiations. For a lot of us, it probably feels like a minor skirmish, right? Something that kind of fizzled out. But was that really what happened, or was it a full-blown economic storm that we've all just forgotten?
You know, the common wisdom out there is that those first-term tariffs were pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But, as we're about to see, that perception really misses the intense drama that was unfolding behind the scenes.
To really understand what's different about the new proposals, we have to rewind the clock. So let's unpack the absolute economic roller coaster of that first term, a period of serious volatility that, honestly, has been completely overshadowed by what came next.
This timeline really tells the story, doesn't it? You can see the dominoes falling one by one. It all kicks off with those big tax cuts in late 2017, which gave the economy a boost. Then, in 2018, the China tariff talks start, creating a lot of uncertainty. That leads to this really pivotal moment in October when Fed Chair Powell makes his autopilot comment. The market, as you can see, completely freaks out, forcing a big reversal known as the Powell put. And then just as a deal with China is finally signed, bam, the ultimate black swan, COVID-19 arrives and just changes the entire world.
Now, one of the reasons these tariffs might seem smaller in our memory is because the focus was so narrow. The main target, really the only target, was China. This meant that key allies like Japan and Europe were mostly just watching from the sidelines. And because of that, there was way less global media coverage, which made it feel a bit distant for a lot of people.
Okay, this right here, this is the quote that lit the fuse. You have to remember, the U.S. economy was already starting to slow down. You had all this trade friction, corporations were moving up their purchases, things were tense. So when the head of the Federal Reserve even suggests that interest rate hikes are just going to continue automatically, well, the market heard that as a massive threat to economic growth.
And the reaction was anything but subtle. The S&P 500 plunged by 20%, and that was in just 3 months. This wasn't some minor dip, folks. This was a loud and clear signal of panic from investors. It showed just how fragile confidence had really become.
Well, a drop like that forced the Fed's hand. They had no choice, really. Alarmed by how badly the market reacted, Chairman Powell completely reversed course. He slammed the brakes on hikes and started signaling that rate cuts were coming instead. And what happened? The market rebounded big time and soared right up until the next major shock. And man, what a shock it was. That U.S.-China trade deal that had just been signed in January 2020, it was immediately eclipsed. In February, the COVID-19 pandemic exploded onto the global stage, and in just 2 months, the stock market fell off a cliff, dropping 40%. It was an event so huge, it just made everything that came before it, including that whole tariff war, feel like ancient history.
So here's the crucial point to take away from all this. The first-term tariff war didn't just fizzle out on its own. It actually reached a conclusion, but that conclusion was completely and totally swallowed by a global crisis. The pandemic is the real reason it's now a forgotten storm, leaving most of us with just this vague, fuzzy memory of what actually happened.
Okay, so that was then. Now, the strategy being talked about for a potential second term, it is not a repeat performance. It is a completely different playbook with new rules, new targets, and a much, much faster timeline. I mean, the contrast here is just stark. Look at this. The first-term strategy was slow, it was targeted, it focused mainly on China, and it happened later in the term. The proposed second-term blitz, it's immediate, it's broad, and it targets not just China, but key allies too. That is a huge difference. It changes the entire game from a one-on-one dispute into a potential global trade shakeup, and it's all driven by a hard political deadline, the 2026 midterms. So this raises a massive question, right? Why the change? What is motivating this faster, broader, and frankly, more aggressive strategy? Well, the answer seems to lie in political calculation and the unique psychology of a final term in office. It really seems to boil down to two main drivers. First, a second presidential term is the last one. There is no next election to worry about, which you can imagine removes certain political constraints. And second, there's a brand new deadline on the horizon, the 2026 midterm elections. The whole strategy is apparently built around getting this tariff conflict resolved long before that date.
This old phrase, it just captures the mindset perfectly. Without the need to ever face voters again, a president is just freer to pursue a more aggressive agenda, even if it means picking fights with allies. It becomes a mentality of, let's finish the job, no matter the consequences.
And here's how that thinking translates into a very concrete plan. The goal would be to launch this tariff campaign right away, day one, and get it all settled by the end of 2025. Why? Because that leaves the entire year of 2026 to shift focus, to put pressure on the Federal Reserve for rate cuts, to try and boost the economy, and then hopefully ride a wave of economic good news into a big midterm victory.
So, we have the game plan. But to really understand how a plan like this is even conceived, we need to look at the core philosophy behind it all. A mindset that just completely blurs the traditional lines between politics and economics.
You know, traditionally, statecraft, the art of running a country on the world stage, operates on a pretty simple principle. You keep politics and economics in their own separate lanes. You solve political problems with political tools and economic problems with economic tools. There's a solid wall between them. But this approach is driven by a totally different worldview. One embodied by a leader who has been described as loving deals more than anything else. So this isn't about conventional statesmanship, it's about the art of the deal.
And in that worldview, that wall between politics and economics, it just disappears. It completely crumbles. Things like tariffs, sanctions, political pressure, they aren't separate concepts. They're all just tools in a toolbox. They're leverage to be used interchangeably to win a negotiation and get the result you want. At the end of the day, the means don't matter nearly as much as the final outcome of the deal.
And this really brings us to our final thought. This whole approach to global affairs is a fundamental break from the norm. It reframes international relations as just a series of transactions, a series of deals to be won. And that leaves us with a really critical question to think about. When a leader treats all of geopolitics like one big business deal, what's the ultimate price?